in the paper, James Marshall sentenced to 11 years for shooting Pruitt. James Marshall sentenced to 11 years for shooting Pruitt. So if it bleeds, it leads. If it's gory, it's a story. This helps the Valley Courier sell some newspapers. Now, James Marshall, I'm just going to actually read the article because this article, the way that they resolved this case is so absurd and ridiculous and insane. So let's just read the article. Okay, so read the article. Defense attorney and former Alamosa resident James Marshall has been sentenced to 11 years in the Department of Corrections in connection to the shooting of Danny Pruitt in the back of the head during a local Black Lives Matter protest in June of 2020. So Danny Pruitt of Alamosa survived the shooting but sustained serious traumatic brain injury resulting in permanent damage. The sentencing brings to a close a case that has been controversial from day one when a local defense attorney went to a peaceful protest armed with a 9mm Glock, which he used to shoot Danny Pruitt through the back window of his truck in allegedly self-defense of others, including his wife. You think it was revenge? You think he went to the Black Lives Matter protest just to shoot an innocent motorist? Is that how this is? And who wrote this article? There's no author. So we'll just assume the entire Valley Courier Corporation wrote this damn thing. So, what are we saying here? Danny Pruitt through the back of the window, defense of others, including his wife. The judicial proceedings that followed Marshall's arrest took on a life of its own, says defense counsel Randy Caney, with multiple continuances as counsel attempted to find a resolution. Ultimately, an 11th hour deal resolution was reached, even as potential jurors who had been summoned for jury duty in the case were gathering in the hallway. The specifics of the plea deal sparked new controversy when it was learned that all charges directly related to the shooting had been dismissed, including second-degree attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, second-degree assault resulting in serious bodily injury, and reckless endangerment, 3 of which carried a sentence enhancer that increases the maximum shooting allowed. So we're going to get into the argument that they had that day and then how, eventually the sentencing hearing turned out. But first, the incident. So you're in Alamosa, you got Black Lives Matter protest. And the way that I'm thinking that you should do protests now, because stopping commerce is how you get the attention of the people. But that's when you're ready to shut the city down. So until you're ready to shut the city down, then you could just do walking protests. You're on a sidewalk. You don't have to stop commerce. Just walk everywhere with the sign everywhere that you go. So, you don't have to stay. What they were doing is they were doing a Black Lives Matter protest in Alamosa, and the crosswalk would light up. They would go into the middle of the crosswalk, and then they would walk away. So every time that the light turned red, it was the main road. Every time that the light turned red, they would be out in the crosswalk. And then before, they should have been off the street before it turned green. But for this Pruitt, Danny Pruitt, James Marshall didn't get the fuck out of his goddamn way quick enough. Now, could James Marshall have lingered for a moment or second? Possibly. Does that give Danny Pruitt the right to threaten to kill James Marshall with his vehicle? If we're back in the Wild West and a man pulls his pistol and he's ready to shoot you, then you have a right to defend yourself. Now, if a man pulls his 2-ton truck and he's ready to run your ass over, because Suge Knight, right? Grand Theft Auto, it's easy, it seems like it'd be easy to run a person over and kill them. Coastia County likes to murder people with their murder, Anyways, James Marshall was in the middle of the crosswalk. Perhaps the light turned green, and so he was still in the cross. And so what did Danny Pruitt do? Well, Danny Pruitt did that little dick move where you lunge forward, right? You go for about a foot. You lunge forward about a foot into the person, to say, get the fuck out of the way. People do that with tailgating. If you're sitting at a red light and you hadn't gone, they'll nudge up into your bumper as if like, hurry the fuck up, just like they're pushing you. So Danny Pruitt with his 2-ton deadly weapon acts like he's going to run over James Marshall, right? That's a funny joke. That's like pulling a weapon. Now people might say, well, driving and this and that. Shut the fuck up. If you're not an American and you can't see yourself as both the driver and the protester, shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. When I compare and contrast this case to Johnny Hurley, and when I compare and contrast this case with the shooting in Antonito, Felix Gallegos is going to kill Byron Duran. Felix Gallegos killed Byron Duran. And I had heard that it was shot in the back. There's 2 shots. I'm not for sure. There's 2 shots. But it's interesting how the district attorney of the San Luis Valley didn't even file a single charge. If you're speeding, you get charged. If you have no seatbelt, you get a ticket. That's a charge. But if you're Felix Gallegos and you murder 26-year-old Byron Duran in Antonito, you don't even get charged. So they don't even believe in their own jury system. They don't even believe in their own criminal justice system. If they believed in it, then that means an innocent man will go free. That means charge Felix Gallegos, get a jury of his peers to judge him, and then see, right? That's the system. That's how it works. But when the district attorney buries all this shit before any charges are filed, they're telling on themselves. This is a rocket docket slaughterhouse. This is a super highway to hell. This is, woe unto ye who enter here. This isn't a criminal justice system. It's an injustice system, and it's just about hurting and destroying. Anyways, okay, so you might get mad about the drive. This is okay. So this is such a I'm gonna get back to this right after I finish what happened. So Danny Pruitt lunges into James Marshall. James Marshall hops out of the way and he pulls a gun out and he shoots him. Apparently, he shoots it in the back window of the truck, and then it hits the back, the guy back of the head of the guy. So, yeah. The initial thing was him trying to run into him. He gets off to the side, and I guess he had a moment, right? He had a second, but then that person could just drive right off, right? He threatened his life. He threatened James Marshall's life, and you have a right to defend person, property, and your home in Colorado, according to Article 2, Section 13. So he had a right to defend his person. I think they should have taken this case to a jury trial. It's just weird, the differences. You had James Marshall. If James Marshall was a cop, if James Marshall was a police officer and somebody lunged their vehicle into James Marshall and the cop feared for his life and shot Danny Pruitt in the back of the head, the DA would have buried that. They would have buried that, as we see in the Johnny Hurley case. So that's apparently James Marshall runs away and he hides in the trunk of a car or some shit. I don't know. But the incident that we're talking about, it was the 1 minute, not even a minute, right? So that's what happened. Danny Pruitt's in a vehicle of some sort of truck, I think, and he lunges into James Marshall. James Marshall gets out of the way, pulls out a gun, and shoots him. So, that was a attempted murder, and so people might say that was, not proportional. He's supposed to get out and make a citizen's arrest. He's on foot. The guy's in a truck. In their place, Marshall was only being charged with tampering with a deceased human body, also a third-degree felony, but one that does not have a sentence enhancer for being a crime of violence. It does not reflect that a deadly weapon was used in the crime and required a waiver of factual basis in the charges in order to be considered by the court. What the fuck? What the fuck? This case is so fucking screwy, it's not even funny. So James Marshall is going to get 11 years, and on good behavior, he might get out in 5.5 years. So I feel like, I don't want to say not guilty, but I wasn't going to say guilty. It wasn't like, he was 300% guilty. I think he had an argument. I think he had a case, and I think a jury of his peers may have heard him out. So what's going to end up with the way the court is going to charge him with tampering with the deceased human body. So the guy's not dead. So that is very disrespectful, right, to Danny Pruitt. Danny Pruitt lived, and he had a terrible time getting back to basically normal. It infantized him and really took a lot away from him. But Danny Pruitt is no angel. He had some legal difficulties with the Costilla County Sheriff's Office. So you have a waiver of factual basis. All right, yeah, he shot the guy, but let's just charge him with jaywalking and tampering with the deceased human body. That's a charge that James Marshall was like, tampering with the deceased human body? That had to get some people scratching their damned heads. The guy's not dead. Whose body did you tamper with? You shot, the guy and then took off. You didn't do anything with the body, unless you want to say the bullet did something with the body, but tampering with the deceased, you were tampering with a live human body. It's a third-degree felony, so they're going to hit James Marshall with tampering with the deceased human body, and apparently since it's not a crime of violence, and it's a lot less or something, so this, that's a better charge than the other charges that were up on him. But ultimately, it didn't matter because the judge sentenced him to 1 year minus the maximum date. So he could have given him 12 years. He gave him 11 years. So that's the backdrop of the case when Marshall appeared for sentencing on Tuesday. The district attorney Payne first witness was Sam Kaufman, an investigator with the DA's office who summarized for the judge the events of the shooting based on videos he had watched from 3 different businesses located in view of the crime scene. In his testimony, Sam Kaufman, that lasted less than a few minutes, Sam Kaufman included 3 details that were condemning of James Marshall's conduct. Sam Kaufman stated that Pruitt pulled up to the intersection. Marshall went to the side of the truck. 3 protesters got out of the way of Pruitt's vehicle. He pulled up to the intersection. No, he was pulling through it. Anyways, there were no protesters in front of the truck, and Mariah Marshall is behind Pruitt's truck when Marshall fires a shot into the back window of Pruitt's truck. Pruitt's truck rolls into the intersection before coming to a stop. At that point, Marshall takes off running past her, leaving her behind him. Mr. Marshall was not seen checking on the other protesters, checking on his wife, or rendering aid to Mr. Pruitt. Other protesters went to render aid to Mr. Pruitt while Mr. Marshall was the first one off the scene. So I didn't know that. I thought he defended his wife. I thought that his wife was in front of the truck. He was in front of the truck. He jumps off to the side. Apparently, Mariah Marshall's behind the truck. So, when I first read the story, I heard that he was defending himself and his wife. But with Johnny Hurley, the cop, Johnny Hurley is going to save the day. You got an active shooter just shooting up the neighborhood in Arvada, Colorado. So in Arvada, Colorado, you got a good Samaritan, right? So you got this, fucking guy just shooting everybody, shooting cops, shooting, I don't know if he shot any civilians. He's shooting at civilians. But he shot and killed a cop, the, active shooter. And you had a good Samaritan that had to carry concealed Johnny Hurley on the scene. And what the fuck does that hero do? What would most people do? Just close their eyes, run away? But no, not Johnny Hurley. Johnny Hurley stepped up to the plate. Johnny Hurley grabbed the ball. Johnny Hurley was, some other sports analogy, the wide receiver who, caught a touchdown, a Hail Mary pass. He's the hero, shows up, comes to the scene, shoots the active shooter, and guess what the police officers in Arvada do? Guess what they do next? Johnny Hurley stopped the threat that was killing innocent people. And to the hero who did the jobs of the police single-handedly, he did all the jobs of all the Arvada Police Department single-handedly. And what was his reward? Death. The cops come to the scene and they shoot and kill him. They were hiding their heads in the sand. They were hiding behind their desk. There was a police station right there. He shot windows out of the cop cars. They didn't do shit. They didn't do shit. But because they're hiding behind the desk, they popped their head up. And after Johnny Hurley had already taken care of the goddamn situation, Johnny Hurley's picking up the guy's gun or some shit. And clearly, if you're picking up the guy's gun that... So what the DA said in that case was that objective reality did not matter. It doesn't matter what actually fucking happened. Yeah, the Arvada police killed not just an innocent person, but a great man at the pinnacle, at the height of his life. If he had a badge, the entire DA would have fucking... he would have been a hero, right? If he was a cop, he stopped an active shooter, everybody would have congratulated him. He did his fucking job. But because he was a civilian, and that makes it harder. If you have the authority to do something, but if you're a civilian, you could get in trouble. You could shoot the active shooter and a fucking cop could fucking murder you. So there is a risk. There's a greater risk of a civilian or a citizen standing up, against injustice or oppression or crime than for a police officer. For police officers, almost like they have immunity. They got carte blanche. They can do, no wrong. So if we use the Johnny Hurley standard of what was the perception of the cop that killed Johnny Hurley, and the perception of the cop that killed Johnny Hurley thought that Johnny Hurley was the active shooter, thought that he had the gun in his hand because he was the active shooter. He didn't know really what was going on. He didn't know the objective truth. But since his perception, since he truly believed that Johnny Hurley was the active shooter, we're just going to go ahead and wash our hands of the whole situation. The DA is not going to charge the murdering cop a single charge. If you get a ticket, you get a charge. If you got a seatbelt, violation, that's a charge. But if you murder a person in Antonito, right, that was robbing the store, he was on drugs, methed out or some shit, was robbing a store, these things I do not like. I do not like these things. And the guy was probably justified to some degree. The guy's committing crime in his property, in his store, in his place of business. But what I want is consistency in my criminal justice system. If we're going to pick and choose who we're going to charge and not charge, and that means you're picking winners and losers before the system even gets to... What is the criminal justice system? A bunch of fucking assholes, a bunch of, a few oligarchs get to say, well, that person gets a charge, that person doesn't get a charge, that person gets a charge. And then we all just go along with that complete arbitrary bullshit? If we were to use the standard of the Arvada cop for this James Marshall case, what was James Marshall thinking? What was his perception? The objective truth doesn't matter. Let's just put him in the worst light possible. Let's assume, that Danny Pruitt didn't try to drive into James Marshall. He didn't lunge at him. He didn't have a malicious smile. He was patiently waiting, and it was green, and he had waited a couple seconds. He thought they all walked away, and when he, went forward, he stopped. And so he just shot, a completely innocent person. But James Marshall was afraid that person was the active shooter that was doing all the damage, and it's his perception that matters. That's all that matters is his perception. The objective reality, who gives a shit? Just his perception. So the man who killed Johnny Hurley, we're just going to look at his perception, right? The man, Felix Gallegos, killed 26-year-old Byron Duran in Antonito September 1st, 2020 of last year. So the DA buried that case around here in San Luis, so these are the same, the same system. The 13th, the 11th Judicial District, something, San Luis Valley. And then Arvada's up north in, by Denver somewhere. So if we were to use the Johnny Hurley standard, the cop who murdered Johnny Hurley, that the perception is what matters and not the objective reality, then that means James Marshall was afraid of being, harmed, of somebody being harmed. He said he thought that his wife was going to be harmed. Somebody was in danger. And so he was there to protect that person. Now, you might say, though, that's ridiculous. Yeah, isn't it? Isn't it ridiculous to say, who cares about the objective reality? in their negligence. At the very least, the guy who murdered Johnny Hurley negligently killed him. And I bet you a jury of his peers would be just as forgiving as the system. Says this is a case where a good man did a very bad thing, Judge Gilbert Martinez. Let's get some more reading of this. So Sam Kaufman, he testifies, right? Matthew Boreski, he's an attorney with the Rocky Mountain Victim Rights Center representing Danny Pruitt in order to make sure that his victims' rights are being observed, read a statement to the court. Boreski described, there's two guys. I once talked to a principal that said that usually if the students are fighting, it's because one of them was jawing, right? One of them might have been more at fault, but the other one was doing something too. So when you say one's the victim and the other one isn't the victim, you best be right. You best be right. Because could you imagine if you were like Anne Frank in Nazi Germany and, one of the Nazis arrested Anne Frank? Could you imagine? They arrested Anne Frank and then, put a bunch of charges on her and puts her in jail? A bunch of fucking Nazis throwing Anne Frank in jail. Is that a big shocker? That's easy to imagine, isn't it? But is it right? Is it just? America got there 2 months after Anne Frank died, and she'd caught syphilis right before she died. So Americans got there too late in World War II for Anne Frank's sake. But that'd be fucked up. That'd be super fucked up. You walked up to the scene and you arrested Anne Frank. Well, the perception of the Nazi was that she, had going to go get a gun. She was going to grab his gun and then shoot him with his own gun. He had to defend himself. What other choice did he have? That Arvada defense sounds like the McMichaels defense. Can you sleep quieter? No? Okay. Having a nightmare? Red Cloud? Is it Red Cloud? Who's having a nightmare, huh? So Matthew Boreski is there to read the victim's rights. He described what Pruitt suffered from being shot, including a 17-day induced coma followed by having to relearn basic activities like standing, taking a shower, brushing his teeth and hair. The bullet that is still in his brain has permanently impaired his short-term memory, attention span, speech, ability to control emotions, and other cognitive functions. Who starts it matters. Now, you could say James Marshall started it by being in the crosswalk. He's allowed to be in the crosswalk. And if somebody's in the crosswalk and they linger for a second, that's forgivable. And if somebody accidentally, went to go, but somebody was already lingering in the crosswalk, that's forgivable too. So perhaps he lingered for, a second, but that's not a threat. But a person who lunges their vehicle into somebody, smiling all devious and shit, means to do that person harm. And a 2-ton truck is a goddamn weapon. It's a deadly weapon. So I feel like some things changed a little bit about my perception. I thought that James Marshall, was defending his wife, that she was around. And then the fact that he shot through the back window, he stepped to the side. So he had a moment, right? He had a moment to reconsider what he was doing. But it's all on videotape. So if we were to look at, Felix Gallegos and Byron Duran, and what about, there's a police station. So I bet you the shooting, where's that videotape? The shooting of Johnny Hurley should be on videotape somewhere. Let's take a look at it. They want to say it's clear, cut, and dry. It wasn't clear, cut, and dry. That's for goddamn sure. If you can't put yourself in the position of a protester, what kind of a piece of shit American are you? That's our First Amendment rights, you stupid fuck. And if you can, definitely put yourself in the seat of an asshole truck driver who's, being a dick to a protester, fuck you again. So he's Black Lives Matter, so I guess that made me somewhat partial to him. Defense attorney, that was interesting. Apparently, defense attorney means you're not a part of the system. They don't like defense attorneys anyway, so, and, in order to make deals with the prosecutors, they can't really buck the system too much. They're kind of like the internal affairs of the judicial branch. So, Boreski, let's see, short-term memory, attention span, speech, ability to control emotions. He condemned the plea agreement, said it offends the concept of justice. He says he's still alive. He's still a person. He's still a human being. At that point, Berinsky turns his attention to D.A. Payne's handling of the case, stating Payne had little to no contact while Pruitt was going through an agonizing time. Berinsky described Pruitt as being victimized twice, first by James Marshall and then by the DA's office that failed to treat him with consideration or respect. On behalf of Pruitt, Berinsky asked that the plea deal be vacated and either more appropriate charges be filed or the case go to trial. They should have taken it to trial. If that does not happen, he requested the maximum sentence he employed. So, I mean, James Marshall's a defense attorney, and he went ahead and rolled the damn dice and said, okay, let's get this small charge and hope that the judge will, do something in the middle. But the judge did the maximum because they threw out all those major charges. James Marshall shot me, ran away, and hid in the trunk of a car. He should be in jail today and not released. Those were the only witnesses called by D.A. Payne. Defense counsel called 5 witnesses to testify: a childhood friend, 3 colleagues from law school, CU law professor who allowed Marshall and his wife to live on her land for several months after the shooting. Each witness described Marshall in the same general terms: good, compassionate man, loved his wife deeply, was concerned for her welfare, and was devoted to representing people who have no voice in the criminal justice system. Mr. Wang, a former prosecutor in Logan, Washington County, testified that Marshall had told him he intended to pay Danny Pruitt full restitution for what he has suffered. Wang then went on to make the case that the longer Marshall's in jail and unable to be gainfully employed, then he would have to wait for restitution. James Marshall made a statement. He spoke at length about his culpability, his regret for having injured Danny Pruitt, his intention to pay restitution, and his fervent wish he could undo what he had done. He wished Danny Pruitt could forgive him, but he did not expect him to. At one point, Danny Pruitt, who was sitting in the front row, made a comment which prompted a request from the judge to be respectful. Pruitt also rose from his chair and left the courtroom on several occasions. Marshall also explained his history with guns, citing a friend of a friend who was stabbed near to where he lived in Ohio. Although he took responsibility for what he had done, he suggested that Pruitt had initiated the situation with his malicious grin and pointing in his direction. He also described the ways he had been punished, which included not being able to practice law in the last 18 months. At least Mr. Pruitt will have closure after today, he said. Marshall also indicated that a decision was made that his law license was going to be suspended for 3 years. After a brief recess, Judge Gilbert Martinez stated that he had not seen the video since the DA did not present that to the court or admit it into evidence. It's on YouTube. The DA could have just watched the video at any moment in time that he wanted to. That resulted in Martinez having to confirm with Payne in court that Marshall's wife was standing behind the truck when Marshall shot Pruitt. Payne confirmed. Martinez then went through in succinct but thorough detail what went into his decision, stating that Marshall, being an attorney, did not factor into his decision. This is a case where a good man did a very bad thing. Is there undue risk that the defendant will commit a crime again? No. But would a minimum sentence unduly diminish the seriousness of the crime and respect for the law? Yes, it would. The only statement that Martinez took issue with was Marshall saying that sentencing would bring closure to Pruitt. No, he won't get that. He will live with this for the rest of his life. Martinez sentenced James Marshall to 11 years in the Department of Correction, which is 1 year short of the maximum sentence. After the hearing, Randy Kenney told the Courier that Marshall was disappointed in the outcome, and they definitely plan to file a motion to reconsider the sentence. Marshall did not plead guilty to a crime of violence. The chances are good that his sentence will be reduced by 50% to about 5.5 years, with potentially less time served if there are no incidents while he is in prison. So there you go, defense attorney James Marshall. Tim Black wanted to say that, there's no white people out here that's, getting in trouble or whatever, fighting for black lives. James Marshall and, James Pruitt's lives are going to be completely forever changed. So, is James Marshall right or not? I wish we had a jury trial. I wish they would have adjudicated this by jury trial. The system thinks that the system was right. That, where's the citizens? Where's the democracy? It's supposed to be civilians, right? We're supposed to have citizen councils, a people's court. So a jury. A grand jury or a real jury, whatever kind of jury you want. So I think you should have took it to a jury trial because On paper, you tampered with a corpse and he's suspended for 3 years. You think he'll get his law license back?